will tell you, looking is a bit difficult today. So I don't know exactly how we're going to do it. I will need some help from you. But a couple of things I wanted to say before we begin. I just don't know if we should wait or should start. What do you think? So the last 2 weeks we were talking about simulacra, and we were approaching it, the question of simulacra, through this notion of, through this essay by Gilles Deleuze. I think it's called Simulacra and Platonism. Yeah. So what did you get? How are you thinking about these last 2 weeks in relation to your practice? Anyone has any thoughts? Was it in any way relevant, the things we discussed? If it wasn't, you can also talk about that. You can also say, for me, not for me.
I kind of wanted, like, say on the street, when you photograph like a drawing or something, but it doesn't look anything like a drawing. It just looks like a minimalist. Is that simulacra? Because that's not a drawing anymore, and it's just abstract.
But it's brain.
No one knows it's a drawing.
What is a drain? What is a drain?
Like a drain or something.
Yeah, like a pipe that takes the water.
Yeah.
But it is still a drain. Or no?
Yeah, and that's what I'm asking. I'm just wondering, when you deliberately kind of take pictures of something that's real, but it doesn't look like that anymore, and it's not even important what it is.
Excellent question. So I think it's a fantastic question. This is the kind of question you should be asking yourself about your work and about simulacra in general. So what do you think? What do you think?
To me it is.
What?
Simulacra.
Yeah.
Because there are two kinds of simulacra. So it could be actually in any of them, because you are taking a picture of something that is real, so there is a copy of something, and at the same time it's something unique, because it doesn't have the real appearance
It doesn't
of
have
something.
the resemblance of what it comes from.
Okay. So a picture of a drain, we might say, it is if the drain looks, for instance, like a snake, and not like a drain or like someone's mouth, then you might say, well, look, it's a simulacra. Okay. However, what if the picture actually does look like a drain? Is it still simulacra?
Yes.
And to push it one step further, as we like, what about the drain itself? Is the drain itself simulacra?
Yeah, because it is something unique in its own self, so it's simulacra.
So what is not simulacra?
Nothing.
Thank you. But I think Irene is right. And following the Deleuzean argument, the notion that the image, can you please open to Natalie? Come in. Can you
Over there.
Can you make some room? Someone can sit here. One of the most important lessons, or kind of, as they say, takeaways from this essay by Deleuze that we were reading. And Deleuze is not trying to say, look, there is another type of images, kind of an addition to the image culture you already inhabit, which we call simulacra. He is trying to do something much more radical. He is saying, this familiar approach to images as representations, as imprints or copies of the real? Well, guess what? It's pure ideology. Yeah, be careful around things or images that pretend to be copies of reality, because they, at least for the reason that they kind of convince you that there is some kind of reality which is independent of the image. And Deleuze is saying, and this is the important thing, there is no reality that is independent of an image. There is no reality that is not an image. Yeah? So for that reason, Shimon, the example of the drain is the picture of the drain that looks like a mouth, similar. The picture of the drain that looks like a drain, similar. The drain, similar. What is similar? That's a good question. That's what we need to somehow find out. But why? Maybe simulacra is sort of all the way down. You know how they used to say that the world is resting on a big tortoise? Do you know? The world is resting on a big tortoise. Okay, fine. But what the tortoise is resting on? On another big tortoise. So it's just tortoises all the way down. Maybe that's how it is in simulacra. And the question is, of course, not whether it is right or wrong. The question is, what can you do with this way of thinking? Can you make work with it? Can you use it? Can it make your life better? Can it make it more enjoyable, more interesting? Maybe not. Maybe it is a terrible thing to think about. Well, don't think about it then. You know? But perhaps this way of thinking can free you in your practice. Maybe you don't need to worry about your picture of a drain, whether it looks like a drain or doesn't look like a drain, because it's going to be simulacra in any case. Yeah? Then maybe other things become important. Maybe the question then is not to what extent this picture relates to the drain, distorts it, represents it faithfully or whatever. Maybe there are other questions to ask. For instance, what is the pleasure that we can get out of it? What is the sensation? How, what does it taste?
So that's why I took the photograph. Because there was that sensation.
That's it. Yeah.
That's it.
And so it becomes about the sensation and not about the drain. Yeah? Now, is sensation similar? This is, I think yes and no.
Yeah.
Yes and no. But you see, what we were trying to do, and in a sense, anyone who lives in the 21st century is already living in a world in which images do not get their authority from being accurate representations. They operate on some kind of different level that we try to explore, So for instance, let's think about selfies, as we did a couple of times before. I guess two ways of discussion, two ways of thinking about the selfie immediately become kind of available or noticeable. On the one hand, just realize something and I will tell you in a minute. On the one hand, you can talk about the selfie as a representation of a person, like this picture of a drain. Yeah. So on that level, the selfie has a kind of representational value. But how can we look at the selfie as a simulacrum? How can we look at it as not as an image, not as a copy of a model, not as a copy of something real, but as something else? And then the selfie becomes a form of expression, a kind of sensation, an affect, maybe. Then the other things we spoke about in relation to the selfie is, let's say, the ability to share it, the ability to express emotions with it, or the ability to achieve some kind of intimacy, you know, or think about Snapchat, for instance. Isn't Snapchat interesting? Are you playing with it? But it would be really, I think Snapchat would be really kind of seductive to experiment with for art practice. Because it's an image that's sort of bound to disappear very quickly. Yeah? It's sort of, it all becomes about some kind of transience, some kind of fleeting moment. Now, I don't know if there are many artists who are currently working with Snapchat or with images that have a built-in obsolescence. Yeah? Wouldn't it be great to make an artwork that has a kind of a ticking clock attached to it that just disappears in front of your eyes?
It's like Gustav Metzger.
In what pieces?
He made a few. He was like experimenting with auto-destructive art. Like he made a piece that involves cloth, and
Yeah.
I think he did it like on the Seine, like in Paris, or maybe it was actually here in London. And it was made of like cloths that were covered in acid, and they disintegrated.
All right, nice. Yeah.
What was that? I didn't read it.
Gustav Metzger.
He made a piece, like a few pieces that were like auto-destructive with acid and cloth.
Oh,
So they like, yeah, Snapchat.
Well, I think it's quite interesting, especially in photographic practice, because photographic materials, of traditional photographic materials, are very sensitive to such things as bleach and acid. So photographers, even like classical photographers, these master printers like Ansel Adams, they used to use bleach on a brush to, let's say, emphasize the highlights in the eyes, or to have really radiant highlights. Now some other people started to use bleach to really erase and eradicate some of their images. For instance, well, it's not so much bleach, but do you know the work of, maybe I showed it to you, Miroslav Tichy?
yes.
Yeah? You like him?
Oh, I love it.
Do you know his work?
Yeah.
You do. I showed it to you.
He makes cameras out of like trash, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
What's his name?
We'll see in a second.
Tishi.
It's actually Tichy. I will tell you why. 1 second.
He's represented by Michael Hollingdale.
Because it's funny.
Yeah. Tichy means quiet in well, and that's him, and that is his wonderful camera. And he says, if you want to be an artist, the first thing you need to do is get yourself a bad camera. Why do you think he says that? What does it mean?
Because in that way he has to do the work. If done, the camera is
What a bad camera can do that a good one cannot?
Like accidents.
art.
Make bad pictures. Okay, I think Famos can quote. So you can just sit here if you like, or if there is room there.
Oh, yeah.
So you see, he made these cameras from some kind of old body with various lenses that he attached to toilet rolls. Yeah. Now, well, obviously, he made his camera into an art object. Yeah. The camera looks like it spent its time in the gutter. So there are two ways to think about it. One, well, he lived in the Czech Republic. He was kind of unemployed, homeless. I don't even know exactly how to. But he had a very troubled life. He started as a young person in art school, but then the Soviet regime happened, and he spent some time in prisons. And when he came back, then he never had a job. He basically was like living like a homeless person in a kind of hut on the outskirts of the town. So perhaps that is really the only camera he could afford, he could use. So there is that as well. But there is also this artistic gesture of a camera made out of rubbish, which are really so incredibly refreshing when you think about all the people that fetishize their Nikons and Canons and these kind of spotless 0.1 lenses. This tries to say something completely different. And so on one hand, we have this strange piece of equipment. Then we need to sort of see what he can actually do with it. And he has these are the sort of images. Now, I'm really happy to think with you through the work of Miroslav Tichy, because there is something that I think is very interesting. A couple of points are very interesting, and also there is a lesson here. What he is doing with this camera is, to put it sort of in very simple terms, he's spying on pretty women. He just takes pictures of, and most of them have very similar subject. So it's a kind of, you can say, you can say it's kind of dirty old men spying on women. Really, really dirty and really old. So it's also quite interesting when he describes his work process, because his story is probably interesting as well. So as I said, he lived many years on the outskirts, sort of, living hand to mouth, taking these pictures. When he was quite old, I think in his 70s, a friend of his took these pictures to an agent. He very quickly became very famous. He had a big show in the Pompidou Center in Paris. I saw it maybe 10 or 15 years ago. And then he died. Well, he sorry? So he became famous towards the end of his life, and then he died. But I think what is important is that he really was not kind of seeking the fame or the exposure, at least according to the story. And every artist creates their own mythology, so we need to take it with a big pinch of salt. But according to the mythology, it was just his friend who knew someone in a big city who had a gallery or an agent or something like that, and suddenly his photographs, these sort of pictures he printed on kind of scraps of photographic paper in his basement, became really sought after objects and very collectible and sold for lots of money, and these big international exhibitions and book contracts and all that. So there are different ways to be an artist, Yes.
This reminds me of a very strange phenomenon that happens in Beijing. There is a business area, like shopping area, called Sanitor, where like all the pretty girls go there and shop. So what happened was that there are a group of old men, just like him, sitting there, like with a big camera, like 5D Mark II or D810, with a very long focal lens, and they just sit there and stalking girls working there and shoot them. And what happened next was that, so like girls who go there shopping, they kind of, you can see that they kind of intentionally dressed very hot and do their hairs, makeup. Well, it's very strange phenomenon. So is that the
Interesting.
yeah, it just feel very same.
So it becomes a kind of a performative space where these guys are there to take the pictures, but because the girls know that they will be photographed, they dress for the occasion.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. That's a really great story. Yeah, it's kind, but it's interesting. What do they do with these pictures? Do they just?
They don't show.
They don't show
them. They just just store them like he did.
Yeah. But you see, well, that's what I think is very interesting. So on one hand, you can say, well, here is just basically a dirty old guy spying on women, you know, because of his sort of deep sexual frustrations. And the stupid art world then takes it up and then valorizes it and makes it into something really unique and special. But, you know, in every park, behind every bush, there is some kind of old guy with a camera who basically does that, you know, and this is it, you know. It's just some kind of dirty man's fantasy. That's one way to look at it. Another is to say that Miroslav Tichy is actually a really interesting artist, that not only he created these images, but he also created the figure of the artist as a dirty old man. Yeah? So perhaps his real creation is himself as this character. Now, which one? So do you see how simulacra can actually help to look at it? You can say, so the simulacra allows you to access this story in two different ways. On one hand, you can say, well, if we just follow the logical, the rational path, this is just a story of the kind of the blindness and the naivety of the art world. But if you look at it more from the perspective of simulacra, then this is not. This is something else. This is some kind of artistic creation. What I think is particularly interesting is that two things. First, that he, and that I think that's why my suggestion that he is really an artist, I think has some kind of justification, even though I don't insist on it. Perhaps both are kind of true. But what I find absolutely fantastic is the way these pictures are framed. The way he, for instance, in this one, he just draws this little line, clearly with a marker pen or something like that, yeah? Not even very well. In some others, he makes a much more elaborate frame, yeah? To me, the frames is really the whole story, because they, or like this one, they sometimes look sometimes that they kind of imitate a real wood frame. It's a shame that Ding is not here today, but it's understandable because she has to finish her show. But Ding is very interested in the frames of the paintings she is copying, and very often kind of that what really makes the work. That she paints the wooden frame that the painting she copies is in. But this suggests to me that there is something going on here which is beyond like some kind of spy on women. Even though it's not very much beyond, because it's still that. and there's no getting away from it. But that's what makes the work complicated and really difficult to pin down. So this is fantastic, no? Because it's a bra, isn't it? It's a bra in the shop window. Yeah? So you really get an insight into something very, very dark.
Yeah.
And you kind of think, well, that's great, because how else we would get access to this part of the male brain, or mind, or whatever. But also, this framing, it really it's a sort of kind of it references museum display. It makes it valorizes it in some kind of form. And there is something else going on here. And that is, you see that all these images, what makes them very, what is very clear is that they have these technical imperfections. These are known technically as watermarks. That happens when you develop your film, and instead of drying it in a dust-free cabinet after squeeging, I don't know if you've been doing all these things, but there was a whole art to squeezing the water from your film, so there will be no watermarks left. This is called dust. All these imperfections, they're not accidents. They're inherent part of these images. And when Tichy is talking about his work process, he says, after I made the print, I don't just put it in a frame. I use it as a coaster for my beer. I put it under the table leg to stop the table from wobbling. I sometimes leave these prints to lie around in the kitchen so the rats will nibble them a little bit. And only once they are sufficiently developed, that's how he calls this process, yeah, of deteriorating, only then the picture is ready for display. So basically he says, take the photographic process of a traditional photographer and reverse every action to its opposite. Instead of the most expensive camera, use the crappiest one you can get. Instead of clean, immaculate film, leave the hair and the watermarks. Instead of keeping your prints in these pristine envelopes with the sheets of the paper in between them, I still get them when I go, when people bring their portfolios for review. You still have these plastic sheets and then the print and then the cover, and it's all like sort of archival. So the whole fascination with permanence and the archival qualities and the immaculate surface of the image, it all gets somehow opened up and ridiculed or interrogated. Yeah? So all these photographic gestures, that generally are made invisible in traditional photographic practice because you're just faced with a clean image and you just deal with what the image represents. Yeah, because you look through it at the drain. Yeah, he makes it impossible to look through. He does everything he can so your eye will stop at the surface of the image and not go through to what is represented. Yeah? So this, to me, is simulacra, or at least for the purpose of our discussion, and to address Shibon's earlier question, which I thought was, really going to the core of the discussion. This is how you get to simulacra. Yeah? Simulacra, as you see, is not outside of representation. If you like, it is inside representation. Yeah? Because it's not an abstraction. It's not something that we know exactly what it is. We know exactly what this picture is about. Yeah? It's still a representation, and yet the eye doesn't just go through the surface of the photograph into the thing. It is stuck on the surface. There is a thing, which is a woman lying there, yeah? But you cannot go and look at it because your eye all the time gets somehow, like there are various splinters in this image that affect your eye and bother it and irritate it, and your viewing remains on the surface of the image, not going through inside. But without this inside, without this something that would draw your eye into it, in other words, without the representation, it wouldn't work. So you kind of need to have both. You need to have the subject that is the drain, yeah, or the woman. You need to have it. Yeah.
No,
So
it's really strange because from this distance, it looks like one of the Impressionist painters. It's very much. It's like when you're not all close. It could have been a painting by an Impressionist painter.
well, I think this is a different question, which is the distance. No, sorry. I think you.
Because I'm not close.
But you are right in a sense. You could say, and why couldn't you say that simulacra, maybe it is a question of distance?
Oh, but definitely it's because you're doing distance between yourself and the
Yeah. Maybe at a certain distance, the representation dissolves to some extent. But do you see? I really want you to. Do you see the duality here? Let's.
There is an interesting relationship between the fetish towards women's body and the defetishization, can I say that? Of photography, yeah.
Exactly right, exactly. This is beautiful. Yeah, because I think you're right. Because what we generally don't notice in photographic practice is the massive fetishization of photography. Yeah? And I know what I'm talking about because for my sins, I had years when I was obsessed with all this photographic equipment, and then then the photograph becomes just an excuse to accumulate the best gear you can have and then store it in your, Billingham bag or something. And then you have all this equipment and you say, what am I supposed to do with it? You don't need to do anything with it. It's just a beauty, just so nice to hold it. So you're right, yeah. It really becomes so much more complicated. But my sense of these images is that they really succeed in drawing two narratives together. One narrative is the representational one that we're all familiar with. Let's just have another, are we in Google Images here? Let's just have another image to compare it with. What should I compare this to? Yes?
Excuse me, can I ask something not very, but some kind of irrelevant?
I think so.
Yeah, what just happened is that you explained all the philosophical stuff behind the picture. And if I repeat what just happened to my friend, is this repeating what happened as similar?
What do you mean? Repeat what happened? What happened?
Like you just explained the philosophical stuff behind the picture. If I just repeat what just happened. Not mimic.
If you repeat this, if you describe what happened down to your friend.
And I just said what you said to me, to my friend. Would that be a simulacrum?
It could be. I think it very much depends how you will describe it. If you will, for instance, describe it as you, Alexandra, just describing to your friend, or if you will, for instance, do something, act it out. I'm not sure. I can answer this question. because I think the point is that representation and simulacra are not opposites. It's not either or. You know, it's not like, you know, I can wake up one day and decide to wear drag, and I can come here wearing my, you know, my skirts and my wigs, you know, and whatever, and then my makeup, you know, or I can come dressed as a man. It's more like both things intertwined, you know. So I'm not sure I can answer this, unless I didn't understand the question.
Well, it's.
I was thinking like it's kind of the same thing as saying like, have you ever heard the phrase "you are like a result of your parents"? You know, like as if you were just a copy of your parents because they raised you and they sort of gave you their knowledge of how to approach the world. But then you could say, no, I'm my own person. I make my own decisions. It's like, is the knowledge that you like receive, if you then recite that knowledge, is that you just being some sort of like filing cabinet full of information, or are you sort of having your own perspective on it? It's kind of the same thing. I feel like it depends on how you feel.
Yeah, the reason I asked the question is that like everything you said here make perfect sense, but if I move out like of this environment, I tell somebody else, it just sounds very funny.
Oh, okay. I
That's
know,
other.
I know what you mean. I understand now what you're talking about. Unfortunately, that's just how it is. It makes sense only in this room. Why? Because in this room, we are thinking and operating within a different logic, within this logic that makes artworks. So yeah, if you take this logic somewhere else, where everything's supposed to be somehow rational and consequential, it doesn't make sense. Yeah, that's just how it is.
So even I repeat exactly what you did to somebody else, but it makes sense here and it didn't make sense there.
It depends to whom you repeat it. If you will repeat that to someone who is an artist or who is engaged in some form of creative practice, they will get it even if it's not in this room, or at least they can. But if you repeat it to someone who just is not part of this world, is not part of this, but it's a little bit, you know, you studied chemistry, didn't you? Isn't it the same thing? If you tell me something that happened in the chemistry course, it will not make sense.
My question is that like even the same thing, and the people who listened what I said didn't make any reaction. It's only in their mind. They understand, or it just does not make sense. Will this be the same?
Mm-hmm.
Like, sorry.
No, go ahead.
For example, I told this to A, and A understood. I told this to B, and B thinks that it didn't make any sense. Even both of them didn't make any reaction. What's the relationship between what you told me and what I told A and B?
What do you think?
I'm just wondering if, like, I don't know, if you're hoping that the answer to this question makes you believe that your feeling towards our discussion, like, makes it more valid. You see what I'm saying?
Not valid, but
Like, so
simulacrum.
If you're asking, are we all mad? The answer is yes. If the question is, are we all mad? The answer is yes. We are. That's why we're here. But that's why we can talk to each other. And that's why. And that's why it makes sense on some level. But sense is a very fragile thing. And it makes sense, but not because it's logical. You somehow, what we just described here, you know, right now makes sense But I notice it so often in philosophy classes. As long as the class goes on, as long as the seminar is in session, thinking somehow elevates to a level when we not only think, we also think about the way we think. Thinking itself becomes the subject of thinking. Once we get out of the seminar, you lost it. It's like getting out of meditation. And then you just, you don't think about thinking anymore. Think about getting your waffle or a cup of tea. Yeah? Not about the thinking that leads to that and what it means. Which is probably good because it would be very hard to function in the world if you always operate on this meta level. But does it help? But I think it's very interesting what you asked. It's and it is frustrating. That's why one of the things I learned from talking to philosophers is that generally philosophers don't like arguments. Philosophers don't like to, let's say, defend. And I also, this is my advice to you: don't argue and don't defend what you do, whether it is your practice, whether it is your thinking, whether it is your writing. If people want to argue, just step away because it's pointless. You're not going to convince anyone. And because with philosophy, the question is not whether you are right or wrong. Any position, any statement can be argued with. I could never convince my mother about anything. I could never explain to her anything that I do with all my life, but especially in my professional life. She always asks, so what do you do in your seminar? What do you do in your lectures? And I tell them, I said, yeah, but this doesn't make sense because it's pointless. The question is never whether it's right or wrong. The question is, does it help? Does it help to see something in a new light? Does it help to make a piece of work? Does it help to somehow engage? Yeah? Does it open some doors? If it does, then you might use some of it. If it doesn't, you will not. But it's kind of pointless to ask who is more correct. Deleuze or Baudrillard.
All of them are okay. Just articulate.
It very much depends what you want to do. It's a bit like asking, what is better, a plier or a hammer? What is better? Well, they do different things. Yeah. If you need to pull nails out and plug the wood, you might want a plier. If you want to stick a nail, then you might want a hammer. But they're just tools in a toolbox. Asking what is the right one is kind of besides the point. So don't waste your time on arguing with people and trying to defend what you do. Somehow, that's what, you remember how when we read the introduction of Deleuze and Guattari to 1,000 Plateaus, they say, sometimes it's just nice to say what everyone else says. People say the sun is rising, and it's nice not to argue all the time, because life is too short. It's sometimes just nice to be normal. Because you need the energy to do something. Now, before we move on, and I want to make sure that there is something here that stays with you, which is that simulacra and representation are not in an either-or contest. Yeah? You only can get to simulacra via representation. Yeah? So people sometimes come to me and say, oh, I want to show you some work, but I'm really sorry, it is still representational. This is not the right way to think about it. We're not going to get anywhere outside of representation. This is how our mind works. We represent things to ourselves. We identify concepts and objects. What Deleuze and, in this case, Tichy tell us is that this road to representation also takes you into this other domain. Now, what is happening here is that what function this hand-drawn frame, these marks on the print, all this damage to the surface, what they do is that they stop you from just engaging with this picture as a window onto something. Yeah, it's a dirty window, it's a scratched window. Instead of looking through it, you end up looking at it. Yeah, so instead of looking through this picture at this woman's legs, we are looking at the print. Yeah, and there is no escaping that. We are all the time caught up in the materiality and the physicality of this object. So this photograph stops being a window onto some reality and becomes a reality in its own right. It becomes an object and not a picture of an object. This is simulacrum. When an image is both an image of something and a something, a picture of an object and an object, then and only then you are in the domain of simulacra. So simulacra is really not that elusive. It's not like you need to travel to some very exotic locations in order to find simulacra. It's not in the Orient, you know. It's not in a sort of on the moon. It is wherever representation lurks. So what you need to do if you want to engage simulacra for the sake of your discourse is to somehow scratch the retina, to make it a little bit more difficult and painful to look through the picture at the reality out there. Because, you know, we spoke, I don't know, when was it? Maybe in the first semester. We spoke about the tradition inherited from the Renaissance of the Albertian frame. You remember Albertian frame? This famous manual for painters, De Pintura, from the 15th century. I'm going to pronounce it correctly. Is that how you would say it? Alberti's book? De Pintura? De Pintura, yeah. And then he said, it was a manual for painters that every painter studied religiously. And it said, you must make sure that when the audience is looking at your picture, it is like looking through the window onto the landscape. Yeah? You have to remove all traces of yourself, of all the traces of how the picture was made. So when I look at it, it will just feel as if the frame is the window and what I see is the landscape on the other side. Yeah? The picture itself has to completely dissolve. So you have to master your representational skills to such an extent that if I make a picture of you sitting here, guys, I will master the rules of perspective, the rules of color so well that I can hold an empty frame and look at you like this, or I can hold my picture and it will just look exactly the same. Yeah? This was the training for artists since the Renaissance. Yeah? Now, painting for the last 150 years said goodbye to these ideas and started to do various crazy things. Yeah? But lo and behold, photography still seems to follow the Albertian diktat to the letter. Yeah? Because you can hold I can take a photograph of you now, I can hold it in front of me at the right distance. And, you know, Fuji had this commercial some years ago. Real, more real than real, something like that. And it would be, you would just see it wasn't a television commercial. You would just see some kind of beautiful landscape, and then someone would push it, and then it would fall back, and you would realize that this landscape, it was just a photograph placed in the real landscape. Yeah, but it was completely indistinguishable. Yeah. Now, that's precisely the logic and the tradition that this work is taking issue with. Now, you can say that in this Fuji, more real than real, and this Albertian history, simulacra is pushed out of the door, completely dissolved, totally suppressed by representation. So what contemporary artist does, like he brings these notions of precisely what Alberti said shouldn't be present, which is your own traces, your own sweat, blood, and tears, the marks from your beer can, you know, the creases that you left on it, your own imperfections as a human being, as an artist, as a maker, they are the material of the work. But, and that is the interesting thing, it's not only about the imperfections. If it was just these marks and the frame, it wouldn't be interesting. What makes it so interesting, what makes it so fascinating to look at, is that it is both. It's both the Albertian frame and the things that were supposed to be out at the same time, like these two layers. Yeah, this is it. Does it make sense? Do you get it? Yeah, this is it. Now, for that reason, you know, Tichy is an artist. Well, that's what I say. I think it's an art. It's a work of art, and not a work of photography. Or at least, this work makes you question all photography that follows the Albertian logic. All the photography that tries to completely eradicate the notion of the photographer. Yeah, and all this kind of technically perfect photographic practice immediately starts to look like very one-sided, very boring, very one-dimensional. It looks like it's missing something. Yeah. So I know we spent a lot of time on it, but I just think it's a very interesting lesson. Now, turn back now in your mind's eye to your own practice. Your practice is already doing these things. You know, your practice is already combining the representational elements and the elements of objecthood or materiality. Yeah? We are now really giving you maybe some vocabulary with which you can talk about your work or articulate it, not defend it, but also perhaps you can now go back and look at your practice and according to these insights, consider how you could enhance it, how could you move it forward, perhaps by magnifying the play between the representational and the simulacra dimensions. But just before we move off this point, because I think it is very important, some of the language that creeps into this discussion of simulacra has to do with materiality and with objecthood. So one way to think about simulacra is that simulacra is an image that is also a thing. What does it mean? What do you think that means?
That it has its own presence.
Yes, and what kind of presence? What is presence? When we say that something has presence,
It's different.
no,
It's
not
sensual.
sensual. Good. Presence is to do with senses. Presence is to do with some kind of weight. You know, when we sometimes tell about people, oh, you know, she has a fantastic presence, you know, when she walks into the room, like, just feel it. Presence is not kind of intellectual. It's not that someone can, speak eloquently, but that could be also part of it. But you don't need to say anything to have presence. It is about being in the space in a particular way. Actors, for instance, have fantastic presence. Some actors, Gillian Anderson, for instance. I don't know if you happen to see her in Streetcar Named Desire. But it was amazing, but great actors are like that. Do you know? You see her?
It's really Marlon Brando.
No.
Well, no,
Something at this stage.
that was just last year, and I think it's also available online. Yeah, but there is one with Marlon Brando and Vivian. Yeah. But Marlon Brando is also a good example. You can just, with actors, it's very clear, and that's how. That's what people look for in an actor. It's not about being able to deliver a monologue. It's about having this presence. Where is it coming from? What is it exactly? And how you can make your work have some of that. So perhaps go to the theater. Perhaps study actors, see what they have, and how can you get something of what they have into your work. Maybe it sounds a bit kind of recipe-like or technical. That's not what I mean at all. But there is something very physical about presence. Another word for it is charisma. Another word for it, and I'm referring to what you have sent me, is authority. Yeah, it's something slightly elusive. Yeah, but
where is aura going to?
Good question. I think it very much depends. What do you mean by aura? Benjamin says that original works of art have aura because of their uniqueness. So they basically they glow. They have this. They have this. It is a form of presence. I think you're right. Good. Yeah. But I think I want to go to a cycle to kind of roll back a little bit to the previous point. Very often when we talk about images, we talk about them as almost abstract representations of things, as kind of second-hand imprints of real things. So this is a real thing, but the picture of it, obviously you cannot make a phone call with it, you cannot do anything with it if it's a picture. So it's second-hand. Yeah? In the world of simulacra, the picture is also a thing. It has a thingness of its own. Just like these images, they have this thingness. Now, you can see to what extent, to what length Miroslav Titi had to go to give his pictures this thingness. He basically had to undo every photographic gesture. He had to go meticulously from the camera to the process to the print to also he had to somehow give up being an artist for his work to have this presence, because if we believe the legend, he never even tried to show his work to anyone. So it's a kind of difficult thing, because it really is. It demands to really rethink radically all aspects of representational practice, but without pretending to leave it behind. Yeah? Or you can also think, anyone here is interested, for instance, in dance? Yeah? So you can think about the difference between, let's say, classical ballet, yeah, which is a representation, Swan Lake, yeah. So the ballerina is really a swan, and you can see the swan. It's uncanny, it's absolutely amazing, and they glide on the stage. It just looks like they're floating on the water, yeah. This is representation, beautiful nevertheless, incredibly mesmerizing. But compare it to modern dance, Yeah, do you know any choreographers of modern dance? Ina Baruch. Yeah. What kind of dance it is? In this modern dance, the dancer is not being a swan. It's something else, you know. It's a body moving. It is about the movement of the body. It's a bit like that, you know. It's everything that in the swan lake has to be made invisible. All the sweat and the tears and the continuous exercise and the broken fingers, and you know, there were some amazing photographs of ballet dancers' feet after practice, and they just look horrendous.
My friend's a dancer. She was telling me that broken glass gets put in their ballet shoes before performances.
Nice.
And they're so mean to each other. It's unbelievable.
But you don't need to put broken glass there, you know.
Exactly, it's already
it's superfluous to requirements, you know. You can Google these pictures of ballet dancers' feet. Now, all of that gets removed, so you have this sense of effortless gliding on stage. This effortless gliding, both at the price of this excruciating torture, which I think is part of the allure of classical ballet. You go there for the kind of sadistic pleasure of observing someone interrupt. I don't think so. But modern dance, I know it's like crude what I'm doing here, but it might be helpful. In modern dance, the pain is not outside of the performance. It's allowed to inhabit it. Yeah? It's allowed to be part of the story, so that the dancer doesn't remove all the traces of the practice, of the exercise. You know, the dancer can look tired. You can feel the effort. You know, you can feel the body fatigued, the body dropping down. You know, it's so on that level, it's kind of similar. Not similar. There is a parallel here. So these are two very different things. And I'm not saying that modern dance is simulacra. And I think if you would tell that to a person, you know, who is engaged in dance, they might not really get what you are talking about. But I'm quite interested in these practices that allow the materiality of the practice to come back and inhabit itself. Okay, shall we take a quick break? To get the handle on, not because it is so remote or obscure or esoteric, but almost the opposite, because it is so close to us, you know? So that's exactly the sense I think that Deleuze was talking about, that, and in a sense you can find the same sentiment in Heidegger as well, that the difficult things, can you please let the difficult things are not those that are remote or hidden, but those that are the closest to us. And simulacra is not exotic, it's not esoteric, it is in the everyday, but for whatever reason, it is being repressed. Now, what do you think is the, can we even ask this question? I don't know, I was just thinking, now just thinking aloud with you, that perhaps there is something, there is a way to connect the notion of simulacra that Deleuze is talking about to the notion of the political. And perhaps people who are considered different, you know, and now there is, because there's soon going to be a referendum in the UK whether to leave the EU or to stay, the way this argument is being framed politically, to a large extent, is around the question of immigration. So people who want to leave the EU say, we want to control immigration. We want to have basically less immigrants coming in. So maybe it is because, or maybe somehow, the immigrant is simulacra. You know, it is somehow do you see what I'm trying to say?
Because it's represented something else, it's not the actual, it's a twisted argument. So
Because,
it's being,
yeah,
Is it something that is the extraordinary?
nice. It is extraordinary. Yes, 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 yes. And I guess there are some strong investments in keeping things ordinary, homogeneous. You know, you sometimes notice it. I notice it very strongly because my partner is from Finland. I'm not saying, I don't want to, I'm honestly not trying to offend anyone who might be, you know, can I even say that? But okay, I will say that. When I went to Helsinki, I thought, God, isn't that lovely? It's just so somehow relaxed and so tranquil, and everybody's so friendly. And you walk into every shop, and it just like smiles. And I was telling her how it is so somehow pretty. Can we get? But she lived here most of her life, and then she said, yes, there is that. People are incredibly friendly, but they're also really hostile to foreigners, and they really don't like anyone who is different, who looks different, who speaks different, who has a different skin color. So there you realize that there is a certain coziness in familiarity when everyone is a little bit like you, maybe a lot like you, speaks the same language, with the same background. You know, there's a lot in common, which is a very nice kind of familial feeling. But it has a nasty dark side that then when you are not of the same cloth, when you are not of the same background, you don't belong. Yeah? So for her, she always preferred to live in London, which is not so nice, and you don't, you know, get hugs when you walk into a shop, you know, and you don't sort of chat with strangers, you know. But somehow it's more okay to just be whatever. Yeah? So here again you have this sort of two things, the representational approach, which at the moment I'm trying to frame it, you know, very tentatively and sort of speculatively in these political terms as a sense of homogeneous, closely knit community, you know, in where everyone is like everyone else. You know, when you look at the other person, you see some kind of representation of yourself, because there are all these similarities, you know, in kin, in language, in looks, in history. And in another community, with everyone coming from a different place, there is very little in common, maybe absolutely nothing in common. Yeah. So here you have it, in a sense, interesting question.
I was just thinking about the beginning of Blue Velvet.
Yeah.
The beginning of suburbia and everything is.
And then there is this ear lying in the grass.
There's
Yeah.
the ear or whatever.
Do you know Blue Velvet? No? Well, you have to see it. It's David Lynch, and it is with Isabella Rossellini that we know from Green Porno. Yeah, it is a really great film. And yeah, it starts exactly as you described, Siobhan. It starts from this picture of a tranquil Midwestern town when the fireman is sort of riding the truck, you know, waving you know, and everyone speaks in the same way, and everyone looks in the same way, and obviously you don't close the door, you know, and some terrible things start to happen. So, but I think it's quite interesting how you can have this duality, how you can identify it, not only in the visual field as we discussed earlier, but also in the political field. So here is a kind of tool for you with which to look at various aspects of life and reality. Yeah, it suggests at the very least that there is a kind of bifurcation, that there are representational elements and simulacra elements in any environment. Yeah, and you as an artist, perhaps the role of the artist maybe can be summed up as exploring the tensions between representation and simulacra. Yeah, tentative, perhaps for the sake of this discussion. Now, how long we have? We probably spend another 40 minutes here. So it will be a really not an easy task to introduce Nietzsche to you in this brief period of time. But it is possible because we're going to take this method of simulacra that we just now developed, and we'll try to read a little bit of Nietzsche through it. Now, we mentioned Nietzsche a couple of times in the past, without really looking at any of his texts. So we're going to do it today, and if we feel that we want, we can revisit him again. So what do we know about Friedrich Nietzsche? That should be really pronounced Nietzsche.
Yeah.
In German, I think if we were...
How do you read that?
Sorry?
It's Nietzsche.
Nietzsche? Okay, I stand corrected. Thank you. Friedrich Nietzsche. Okay, so Friedrich Nietzsche, what do we know about Nietzsche? Well, he was German. When roughly he lived? What period you associate with?
1880s to 1920s?
No. Actually, 1886 he died. No, he. Okay. I don't know if there is a timeline of his life online. Okay, so the story of Nietzsche is roughly the story of the 19th century. He was born in the beginning of the 19th century. He was born not in the beginning, in 1844. He was born, and well, he died in 1908, but, and that is the absolute issue here, in 1889, which is at the age of about 36, is it correct? Yeah. 1899. So he was born in 1844. And how old was he in 1889? 45 years. 45, yeah. At the age of 45, he had a mental breakdown, and he collapsed. And really, he didn't write anything since. He was basically hospitalized, or his sister would look after him until he died. So his active, productive life as a philosopher is about until the age of about 45. Now, this is one instance when the biography and the writing are so closely intertwined that we need to say a few words about it. So Nietzsche was born to a middle-class family. He was a very bright student. In his early 20s, he was already a professor of Greek and Latin classical studies. He was fluent in the classical languages. So he was a professor in Basel, I think, for a few years, and then his health deteriorated. He was also, for a while, during the Russian-French War, he was an orderly, so he was something like a nurse, a military nurse, for a while during the war, which also affected his health quite badly. But he was very frail physically, so after a few years of being a professor in this university, he was discharged and he had a small pension. And he spent the rest of his working life kind of living on this very meager income, living in sort of rented accommodation in bedsitters, I would say, or studio flats, sometimes in Italy, sometimes in Switzerland. Very lonely, not really kind of capable of human contact. With, and this excruciating loneliness and this very frail physique. He speaks about it a lot. So, you know, the image you should have is someone who is, well, it's a little bit like Miroslav Tichy on some level. You know, is this person who is really kind of on the margins looking in, but not with a homemade camera, but with another optical device. Yeah? With a different way of looking at things. But I kind of think it is a fortuitous comparison, you know, between Tichy and Nietzsche. And what is also important is that he's very frail. He needs to think. Stephen Zweig, if you know this German writer, wrote a really beautiful essay about Nietzsche. Do you know? Yeah. I mean, it's just fascinating. I'm sorry I don't have it here. If you find it, you should read it, because it's a kind of imaginary story, but it also really gives you the picture of the man. So,
What was his name?
Stephen Zweig. How do you spell Zweig? Z-W-E-I-G.
W-E-I-G.
I think in general he's read like
And what's the poem called? An essay.
Z-W-E-I-G.
I don't remember what this essay is called.
Maybe I already like to find it.
There is even a PDF.
Is that the same one who wrote the Czech novel?
Who wrote what?
Czech novel, is that the same?
The soldier. What novel?
It's called the Czech novel. Is it
I
the
don't know.
same?
No. Zweig wrote a lot of things, so it's possible.
Little history guy.
You will find this.
I think also Richard Wagner, he is a musician.
Yeah.
He also wrote about Nietzsche because they have.
Yeah. And we might touch upon it.
Maybe a scholar Google scholar.
I think this is enough. This is Zweig on Nietzsche, just 2 paragraphs, and I think the source is this, Master Builders. But Zweig is out of copyright. I'm sure you can just read his texts online. Why don't we just read this? It will give us a bit of an insight. Who could read it to us? These 2 paragraphs. Can you see it?
No, it's just small.
Would you like to come here?
Yeah.
I think if I enlarge it, it will just go outside the frame. No, here.
So, he is shy, about 5'8", but a little stooped, almost blind, reserved, unaffected, and especially polite. He lives in modest boarding houses in Silsmaria, Nizza, Mentone, Rome, and Turin. Carefully, the myopic man sits down to a table. Carefully, the man with a sensitive stomach considers every item on the menu, whether the tea is not too strong, food not spiced too much, for every mistake in his diet upsets his sensitive digestion, and every transgression in his nourishment wreaks havoc with his quivering nerves for days. No glass of wine, no glass of beer, no alcohol, no coffee at his place, no cigar, no cigarette after his meal, nothing that stimulates, refreshes, or rests him. Only the short, meagre meal and a little urbane, unprofound conversation in a soft voice with an occasional neighbour, as a man speaks who for years has been unused to talking and is afraid of being asked too much. And up again.
Sorry, I will just put it up. Yeah.
And up again into the small, narrow, modest, coldly furnished chambre garnie, where innumerable notes, pages, writings, and proofs are piled up on the table, but no flower, no decoration. Back in a corner, a heavy and graceless wooden trunk, his only possession, with the 2 shirts and the other worn suit. Otherwise, only books and manuscripts, and on a tray, innumerable bottles and jars and potions. Against the migraines, which often render him all but senseless for hours, against his stomach cramps, against spasmodic vomiting, against the slothful intestines, and above all the dreadful sedatives against his insomnia, chloral hydrate and veronal. A frightful arsenal of poisons and drugs, yet the only helpers in the empty silence of this strange room in which he never rests except in brief and artificially conquered sleep. Wrapped in its overcoat and a woolen scarf, for the wretched stove smokes only and does not give warmth. His fingers freezing, his double glasses pressed close to the paper. His hurried hand writes for hours, words the dim eyes can hardly decipher. For hours he sits like this and writes until his eyes burn.
Thank you very much. That was very nice. Do you see? It's a little bit like Tichy. Yeah? Like Miroslav Tichy, because there is something of this loneliness and awkwardness and solitude, and then we feel that somehow the art, which is in the case of Tichy, is spying on women for the simulacra of companionship he will never have. Yeah? And Nietzsche, who would really maybe rather have a dialogue with another person and maybe have, but this is not possible because communication is so difficult and awkward. And then, but there is this incredible thirst to live, to be in the world, to be with the world, but yet everything is stuck against you. Perhaps this is exactly the condition at which you start writing, not because you want to write, but because nothing else is available. Yeah, maybe that gives you kind of a hint of, the sort of art that happens because this is the only thing left, not as a choice, but as having no choice. Yeah? Is it romantic? Well, it is romantic, of course. At the same time, I think Zweig here, in his genius, gives us a very potent vision of what it's like to be Nietzsche. Now, so for about 20 years, he writes relentlessly, book after book after book. Not the normal books that you would recognize, Everything that goes through Nietzsche gets somehow subverted and corrupted, like photography. Once Tichy gets hold of it, gets completely corrupted and becomes sort of its own spectral, upside-down, perverted image, its own evil twin. So philosophy in the hands of Nietzsche becomes a kind of macabre, dark, jokey, messy, sensuous stuff. You know, normally, how a philosopher wrote normally before Nietzsche? Well, you just need to open a page of Hegel or of Kant in order to get the sense of the logical mind that structures an argument, that following the Albertian dictum, all traces of the philosopher are removed from the philosophy. Kant is not writing about his own insomnia. He is writing about the structure of reason. Not his reason, the universal reason. He's not writing about his indigestion and what he had for lunch and how it made him have a nap, you know, and what happened. He writes about universal categories of judgment, aesthetics, or whatever. Or when Hegel is writing his phenomenology of spirit, then he writes about not his spirit, not Hegel's spirit, it's the universal spirit, and the journey of the universal spirit from ignorance to complete understanding of the world. You know, it's all these universal, objective issues. I mean, for comparison, I could open up a page of Kant or Hegel to show you, but I think you get, I mean, because I'm sure before you came to this class, before you started to read philosophy, and so what it kind of can do, perhaps your own notion of philosophy was like that, you know, very analytical, very abstract, dealing with things that are not really relevant to any everyday engagements, but some kind of abstract questions, you know, what is more ethical, you know, and this sort of, what is it, you know, what kind of everyday concepts really mean, what is the meaning of time, you know, but when you read Nietzsche, it's all completely different. It's somehow it takes this whole genre of philosophy and completely turns it on its head. With Nietzsche, I think philosophy reaches its age of modernity. Just like around the time he is writing, painters discover expressionism. They step away from rational, logical representation. Yeah, the late 19th century. We even have photographs of Nietzsche. You know, that's how modern he is. At the same time, he is probably the least modern of all the people we read so far. But many things begin with this man. Okay, now, one more point about his life before we move to the text itself. He wrote Ecce Homo, which is his autobiography, a perverse, corrupted, some kind of monstrous version of an autobiography. We'll see in a minute why. He wrote it in the last year of his sort of sane life before he lost it, as we say today. But the way he lost it is also quite important. He was in Turin, that was mentioned there, one day walking down the street, you know, perhaps to his lodgings. And I think I told you that story once. Yeah, I did, no?
Yeah.
And you remember what happened? He saw a horse that kind of collapsed and being flogged. And he ran towards the horse and hugged it and said, "Oh, you poor thing." And that's it. And at that moment, he really stopped. And he did not write anything after that. He was basically insane. The point is, well, not exactly the point. What is interesting is that Nietzsche was ill all his life, both physically and somehow mentally, you know? Now, some people say that perhaps he had syphilis. Yeah. And perhaps he got it while he was a soldier in his Prussian army. And syphilis really has some kind of known symptoms of syphilis. They have these moments of euphoria, so it might be. But the thing is that with Nietzsche, philosophy somehow had to accept illness into itself. And philosophy as an expression of illness, and also as, what I want to say, that suddenly, with Nietzsche, the work of the philosopher becomes really about this pain, which is physical and mental. And what is it about pain? You know, the thing about pain, we also mentioned it several times here. It's not something you can represent. It's not something you can communicate to someone else. If I have, well, I have, at the moment, as I told you earlier, I have this really blurry vision. But I can only tell you about it. I cannot make you see the way I see right now. Yeah? Now, so this is the thing about pain. It kind of defeats representation. It defeats reason and logic. You know, next time you have a stomach cramp, you know, notice how your whole life changes for that period, and everything then becomes about this cramp. You know, and you think, oh my God, you know, 10 minutes ago, before I had it, I was so happy, and I didn't even know. I didn't even notice how good I was feeling because I didn't have that. You know, and then you think, oh, the moment it goes away, I just promise you. I just promise myself that I will enjoy every minute of not feeling this pain. But of course, once the cramp goes away, 2 seconds later, for a few seconds you're in a state of bliss, and after that, it's normal. You know, it's the new normal again. So you forget. But there is something very peculiar about and strong about pain that defeats logic, defeats reason. Yeah, you cannot rationalize it. The whole of the rational edifice seems to collapse the moment you have toothache. Yeah, logic does not help, which is kind of a very trivial and banal thing to say. But I think with Nietzsche there is for the first time in philosophy, an attempt is made to bring this experience into thinking.
And that's why I think it's even worse that it got instrumentalized during the Nazi regime, Nietzsche's writing.
Yeah.
Because I think it was actually his sister who was like connected to it and instrumentalized it in such a wrong way.
His sister, yes, but you are absolutely right, Julie, and that is the really sad part of this story. Once he collapsed, his sister was looking after him. She was younger, but she was also a kind of Nazi sympathizer, we would say today. She even in her old age became friends with Hitler. And I mean, the memory of Nietzsche is quite heavily tainted by the fact that the Nazi party saw Nietzsche as its philosopher. Yeah? Why? Well, because Nietzsche has this notion of the Übermensch, which comes from Zarathustra. You know, the Superman, the man that is above, the man that is over, the overman is translated sometimes into English. Now, what Nietzsche had in mind with this notion of the overman, he was talking about someone, or about the condition of humanity once humanity gets rid of God and all the baggage of logic and reason and history. We discussed it several times in the past. And he was talking about the new human being that will come free from these misconceptions of reason and religion. He was not at all talking about the Aryan race as this sort of above. And not only that, he despised Germany and Germans.
Yeah.
From the bottom of his heart, for him, it was the crassest nation. What he has against Wagner, he says, well, you used to be beautiful, but look at you, you became German now. You became Teutonic, which is, there's only one thing for Nietzsche which is worse than being German, and that is being English. Yes. So to take Nietzsche into this domain of the Nazi world outlook is, of course, a travesty, and his sister has a lot to answer for. So yeah, you are completely right, Julie. But after the Second World War, an American scholar, Kaufman, did a lot of work trying to reintroduce Nietzsche into the Anglo-Saxon world by making some beautiful translations and writing about Nietzsche. And I think
in Austria, what I can say is that at university it has like this bitter taste. It's still something we don't hear about.
Really?
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
It's considered as so far right.
Nietzsche considered far right.
Yeah.
Yeah? That is fascinating. That's really interesting. God, yeah, well, we could do a seminar just on that. But okay, so that's the story. I mean, you get it. It's a character. Yeah, it's a personality. But also, I think the way to think about Nietzsche, this is an artist. That's why I think I keep comparing to Tichy. This is an artist. He works with language. He works with words because this is the material from which he makes his images. But like you, Nietzsche works with images. His are linguistic constructs. Yours may be made of other material. Yeah, but he is a kindred spirit. Now, there are several translations, and some of them are excellent. Kaufman translations are very beautiful, very poetic. The Penguin ones are readable and nice, but at the moment, the one I have here is, so the one I have here is from Cambridge. Yeah, there is also, what happened? Did it just switch off?
I think maybe it's a time. There it is.
Okay. No. Okay. Yeah. So at the moment we're going to read from these translations, which are kind of academic, so they have a lot of footnotes, and it's a pretty good source. I have to use that as well because my notes are on here. Okay, so now this Ecce Homo is really quite fantastic text. It's one of the last things he have written, and the title is interesting. What is Ecce Homo or Ecce Homo? We don't really know. What?
It's what Pontius Pilatus said.
Yes. It is from the New Testament. Who is Ecce? What does it mean? Ecce Homo.
Behold the man.
Yeah, behold the man. Oh, this is the man. And who is the man? Yes, Jesus. So when Nietzsche comes up and calls his biography, or autobiography, Ecce Homo, he kind of says, well, I am Jesus. Which is sort of interesting, yeah? Or the Antichrist, yeah, which is also part of the same book, yeah. And he has a book which is called The Antichrist. Yeah, he says, I am Jesus. That's basically the first sentence of this autobiography. And then, no, that's actually the Antichrist. And the book has a subtitle, which is How to Become Who You Are.
What?
Huh?
What?
How to Become What You Are, sorry. And in this translation, it is actually better. It says, how one becomes what one is. Now, that is already sets up a very complex image. First, Ecce Homo. I am Jesus. Hello. Who are you? I am Jesus. And then, how to become what you are. Now, it's a paradox, because why do you need to become what you already are? If you are a chair, do you also need to become one? You are already it. Aren't you? You are what you are what you eat. No, that's what they say, yeah? So, how do you become what you are? Sort of suggests that, well, it suggests that there is a certain notion of journey, a certain notion of movement, and probably a kind of lack of fixity in this idea of self. Yeah? So what you are is not a given. You need to fight for it. You know? I mean, it's like how to become what you are. Well, you are an artist, okay? How to become an artist? So you never are an artist. You're always in the process of becoming. You see where Deleuze and Guattari got the notion of becoming from. Yeah? You are in the process of becoming who you are. This process of becoming never stops. You are the becoming of you. The becoming of you is you. So you are not Irene. You are not Alexander.
I am the process.
You are the process of becoming Irene. Yeah. And this, now, what is the advantage of talking about it in this way? Well, first, it suggests that you are not some kind of fixed entity that goes through life like a kind of little tank, you know, immune to the environment. But your becoming is all the time in response to what is happening, you know? So this becoming becomes you. So you are not Irene. Irene is not you. It's the movement. And what is this movement? This is very important to the Nietzschean philosophy. What is this movement? What do you need in order to move?
Change.
You need change, yeah. What do you need to make change? I want to change something, you know, I want to change this, you know. What do you need to make change?
Desire.
You need desire. You need what?
Energy.
Energy, yeah. You need power. To change, to become, you need power. You need force. If you will just be completely passive, yeah, you will not become anything. To become, you need to have power, you need to have force. And that's what Nietzsche calls the will to power. And that's a very famous Nietzschean expression. The will to power is nothing else than the will to become yourself. Yeah? You are not what you are. You need to will. You need to want. You need to somehow forcibly find a way to become what you are. And that can be, you know, that's a life's work. That could be difficult. painful. You might have to overcome obstacles. Which I know from talking to you guys, that for some of you, it's a really difficult thing, and being here, and it requires a massive sacrifice. And I know you're all coming here, looking glamorous, but I know that for many of you, it's a struggle. Of course, it's a struggle, because it's a struggle to become who you are. But for Nietzsche, this struggle is you. The struggle is not like, oh, damn it, like now that happened. That is you. It's kind of, already in this sentence, you see how the whole worldview is somehow shifting from the focus on the subject, on the individual, kind of cocooned in their self-identity, to a process, to an energy, to a kind of thing that just needs to go forth. Yeah, it is this going forth that is you. I mean, if you get that, you already got something very, very Nietzschean. Yeah? But you can also, if you ever were interested in psychology, in Freud, or in psychotherapy, you can see that a lot of psychological literature is dealing with the process of becoming who you are. Yeah? And it is somehow situated within this thing. Okay. How are you doing so far? We are running out of time. And it is very annoying. But let me just do something. One second. So, just let's have a look at the table of contents of this very strange autobiography. So, chapter 1, why I am so wise. Chapter 2, why I am so clever. Chapter 3, which is my favorite, why I write such good books. And then what follows is the list of all of these are titles of books he has already written, about which he says just about a paragraph in this. And then, finally, why I am a destiny, or your destiny, or their destiny. It's difficult because you cannot read it because it is too far away. You really cannot see it, no? It's hopeless.
Yeah, it works.
It works. I need to change it to a single page. We're going to just look at the section on war. Okay. Let's read a little bit from this, even though this is meant to. Could someone read it to us? Simona, could you read it to us? Could you see? Is it difficult? If it's too far away? You can come closer.
War is another matter. I am warlike by nature. I have an instinct for attack. To be able to be an enemy, perhaps that presupposes a strong nature. In any case, it is part of every strong nature. Strong natures needs resistance. That is why they look for resistance. An aggressive pathos is an essential component of strength, in the same way that lingering feelings of revenge are an essential component of weakness. Females are vengeful, for instance. This is a constituent part of their weakness, just like their sensitivity to the needs of others. One way of measuring the strength of an attacker is by looking at the sort of opponents he needs. You can always tell when something is growing because it will go looking for powerful adversaries or problems, since a warlike philosopher will challenge problems to single combat. The task is not to conquer all obstacles in general, but instead to conquer the ones where you can apply your whole strengths, suppleness, and skill with weapons, to conquer opponents that are
Sorry. Yeah.
where are you?
Just a little bit. Your
That
equals.
are your equals. Equality among enemies, first presupposition of an honest duel.
Okay, let's stop here. I mean, it will take us a little bit longer to get into the spirit of the Nietzschean text. But this is interesting because he says, when he says, I am warlike by nature, you can see, by the way, why it is easy to say, well, that sounds very right-wing. That kind of sounds a bit fascist, you know. What always talk about war and fighting. Of course, this is only one way. It also, you can say, it also sounds troublingly misogynistic. Females are vengeful, and this is a constituent part of their weakness. So here you have a right-wing chauvinist, you know, that kind of almost you could say, well, this is like a UKIP manifesto or something. But, but of course, there's many ways you can look at it, and the talk here is not about war. Well, it is a kind of war, but it is about a particular way in which you are in the world. You know, to grow, you kind of need an enemy. But the enemy doesn't have to be your adversary. It doesn't have to be a person. Let's say, for Miroslav Tichy, somehow he crept into this conversation and he became our point of reference. For Tichy, the enemy is quite clear. The enemy is the traditional established photography. Yeah? So that's what you go to war with. Yeah? Strong natures need resistance. That's why they look for resistance. An aggressive pathos is an essential component of strength. So, and he says I think in the previous section, he says, where is it? Yes, it is really complicated with the system. Anyway, what I wanted to yes, here listen, I will read you from this, with the Why I'm So Wise. The happiness of my existence, perhaps its uniqueness, lies in its faithfulness to give in the form of a riddle. As my father, I am already dead, and as my mother, I am still alive and growing old. This double birth from the highest and lowest rungs, in the lowest rungs of the ladder of life, as it were, simultaneously decadent and beginning. This, if anything, explains the naturality, that freedom from partisanship in relation to the overall problems of life, that is perhaps my distinction. What is it talking about? What is the whole point here is to somehow show that to be a philosopher is also to have a digestive tract, is also to have mother and father, is also to have fights and battles. But it's a lot about where do you live, what do you eat, what is the weather outside, how is the climate. No one else before Nietzsche mentioned any of these things as part of their philosophy. Because I have this unruly PDF that doesn't want to obey me. I have it's difficult to find the section. What if I will just search this one here? This is very good here. My formula for human greatness is amor fati, that you do not want anything to be different, not forwards, not backwards, not for all eternity, not just to tolerate necessity, still less to conceal it. What is amor fati? Do you know what it means in Latin? Amor? Amor? Love. Fati?
Destiny? Fate.
Fate, yeah, not fat. It would be nice if it meant love your fat. That would be. But this is a different kind of self-help. He says, love your fate. What does it mean, love your fate? It means, and this is completely essential to the Nietzschean project, it means that, in a sense, it's accepting what the card, the hand you are dealt, and playing this hand. Amor fati. The example he provides in another context is of the game of dice. You know the game of dice. You throw dice, I throw dice to see who gets the double six. Double six is the winning combination. If I get the double six, I collect everything from the table. Yeah, that's the game. Now, so that would be the representational way of playing. You throw the dice and wanting to get the double six. This is the winning. For Nietzsche, the Nietzschean dice player is not looking for the double six, but any combination that will come on the table. This is the fate. That is what you get. There is no one winning combination. Getting everything off the table is one fate. Getting everything you have taken from you is another fate. Your task is not to try to get double six, but to try to love the throw that you get.
So it's exactly to be Jesus, to be God.
It's exactly to be Jesus. It's also exactly to be an existentialist. It's saying that, you know, your existence is what matters. It's not about being the first, it's not about winning, it's not about getting a prize, it's about accepting, not only accepting, but loving the throw that you got. This is a big ask, no? Because we are normally taught, you know, reach for the stars, reach for the prize, you know, win the lottery or whatever, you know, be the best. But not everyone can be the best. Only one can be the best. What happens to everyone else who is not the best? They are losers. Yeah? So they lost it. They basically fall off the wagon. They lost in the race of life. Nietzsche says not so. Can you see again the emphasis on the victory, the emphasis on getting the prize, on getting the top mark, you know? You come home from school, you know, what did you get? You know, you get an A. Oh, well, you're a good boy. You know, until next time. If you didn't get an A, well, you're not going to the cinema, you're not getting a pizza, you know, you're being punished. This is the representational model. There is one ideal, and you need to get as close to it as possible. Get as close to the victory model, you know? If you cannot drive a BMW, at least drive a Saab, you know? But it must be a badge, you know? You just need to get there. You somehow need to show that you are successful. This is the representational model because there is one idea of what a good life is, and you need to get as close to it as possible. And ultimately, this good life is somehow unattainable, you know? So Nietzsche is saying, there is another way. It's not about being the winner, even though he speaks earlier about war, you know? But it's not about winning, it's about fighting. And it is about accepting the outcome as your own fate. Yeah? So you got to be, this is the fate. It's not, okay, now I'm a loser, you know? This is this is the hand. How are you going to live it? How are you going to live it so this will, to accept, and this is his challenge. It's such an interesting thing, it's fascinating. His challenge is, live your life so you will it to return over and over again. You know, we spoke about it in the past. Would you like this to happen again and again and again and again? That means amor fati. Love your fate. Love your fate to such an extent that you will it and you accept this is it forever and ever. You know, it's not about reincarnation, and in the next reincarnation you might be born in a mansion. You know, you might be, you know, have some kind of enchanted life. No, in the next one, the next one will still be this, and accepting that as your fate. And this for Nietzsche is the will to power. Yes.
So is he saying love your fate? What if you don't?
What if you don't? Then you are weak. Because the power is in this, and of course, you know, it's a challenge. But in a sense, the other option that we so readily accept, that everyone's supposed to be a winner, is unsustainable. You know, the 24 of us here, you know, only one going to get the prize, you know, if there is a prize, you know, and what if there isn't? You know, then what? But what happens to everyone else? So he somehow, the way we normally think, we have this kind of pyramidal structure, and everyone wants to be at the top. And Nietzsche is saying, it's not about this pyramid. It's about whatever throw of dice you got is doing something with it, that is meaningful. The throw of dice that Nietzsche got was pretty dire. You know, he didn't win anything. He became very, very ill at a very young age. He lost his job. He was living on this tiny stipend, really lonely, kind of with this two shirts and one good suit in the trunk. And you know, and why not just give up? You know, why not just kill yourself? Why not just throw in the towel? But the love your fate dictum means this is the hand you play. How are you going to play it? So, and he plays it, and he plays it as until the last moment he can still think and write. And then this is the end. The end comes for everyone. Yeah. So this is, so in a sense, Nietzsche is not. He is really, for that, on that level, this is really autobiographic. He really telling us what it's like to be him. He also kind of says, look, if I can do it, you know, from within my solitude and social awkwardness and physical illness, you can do it. But there is another dimension, which is a rejection of that overarching kind of institutional morality. The morality that says, you know, if you want, you know, there is kind of the good way and the bad way, the winners and losers, you know, you can be the sinners and saints. You can play it in any way, but basically there are hierarchies. For Nietzsche, there is no hierarchy. It is about making the most of what you got. Sadly, we need to finish now. We're going to interrupt for 2 weeks, and I was kind of thinking of maybe because next week I'm installing the degree show. The week after, I will probably be marking. So we don't have studies. We don't for 2 Wednesdays. We don't have a